Abby, and I'm from Midtown, Lexington, and this is me at work.
Hi, I'm Darcy from our downtown church, and this is me at work.
My name is Jamal Garnett from Midtown Two Knots Church, and this is me at work.
Hey there, this is Chris Cook from our downtown church.
So good.
My name is Austin Taylor, and I'm a financial analyst. I took this job because I wanted to stay in Columbia, in large part because of being able to be involved with student groups. The most difficult part about my job is, number one, that it is very competitive because it's a large company. I think that I find a lot of my worth and my identity in my job as well. So combining those two together can make my job difficult if I allow for my emotions to be dictated by how my work is going for that day. Because of Jesus, I now have the opportunity to be able to walk with integrity, to be able to be honest, to be able to serve those around me, even when it's something that I don't want to do. It frees me up to, number one, be able to enjoy my job for what it is. Secondly, it allows me to find my identity in Him, which then allows me to be able to perform my job to the best of my ability.
Hey, how we doing? Doing good? Cool. Well, as Bailey said, my name's Jake Blair. I work primarily at our downtown church. I help oversee communications and teaching, and it's good to be here. I'm also the guy that you plan ahead of time when you're about to have a baby and you don't feel like teaching that Sunday. So always good to be that guy. And congratulations that Lexington has grown by like 4 children since last Sunday. Like, that's insane. What's in the water? What's happening? Anyway, good to be with y'all this morning. We're continuing in our work series. We're in week 4 of the series, and weeks 1 and 2, we were talking about how work is important. It's part of God's story. We are partnering with God to take the world somewhere, so we need to be mindful that we don't denigrate our work or that we don't demonize our work, but see our work as something very important that God intends for us to be a part of. If you have a Bible, if you will, turn with me to Matthew chapter 6, verses 24 through 33. We're going to be there most of the time this morning. And as you are turning there to Matthew chapter 6, this is most famously called the Sermon on the Mount. This is Jesus' teaching from Matthew 5 to 7. He's on a mountaintop teaching his disciples. And a big motif that you're going to see when you read the Bible all the way through is there are generally mountaintop experiences where God is meeting with his people to give them commands in order for his people to go live those commands out. So back in week 1, we were talking about the Garden of Eden taking place on a mountaintop. And God is telling Adam and Eve how to live the good life, how human life is to flourish, how life is designed to work and to go live that out. You have an Exodus that we looked at last week. You have God talking to Moses and the elders, giving him the 10 Commandments and the law. God is talking to his people for the purpose of them to go live it out. So then you get to Matthew chapter 5 through 7. This is the Sermon on the Mount, and it is no coincidence. We see God talking to his people with the purpose of them. They're being commissioned. They are called to live out those commands. So all that set up to say Matthew chapter 6, verses 24 through 33. Verse 24 reads this: "No one can serve 2 masters, for he will either hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money." So what Jesus is saying here is you can't serve God and something else. In this example in verse 24, he's saying you can't serve both God and money. I love what, for all you old schoolers out there, I love what the King Jimmy translation says of verse 24. It says, "Ye cannot serve God and mammon." So what that translator is doing, he's personifying money to be this rival spiritual power in your life, almost like this demon that is vying for your heart's attention and affection. And what Jesus is essentially saying is, in your life, you only have room for one important thing. You only have one priority, and what's that thing going to be? Is it going to be God, or is it going to be, in Jesus' example, is it going to be money? And for us, living in 2019, how does one normally make money? Through work, right? So you can't serve God and fill in the blank, whatever that is, whether it be your bank account, relationship status, your work. And for the sake of our series, we're going to be filling in the blank. You can't serve God and work. Your heart only has attention and affection and can only really focus on one thing. And what's that thing going to be? And there is a real danger we need to recognize coming after our souls, coming after our lives when we value work over God. And as we're going to see this morning, when we worship work over God, it turns us and twists us and corrupts us into something that God did not design for us to be. So put another way, when we believe work to be ultimate, it informs our identity and it dictates our actions and causes a whole world of problems. I'll say that again. When we believe work to be ultimate, it informs our identity, dictates our actions, and causes a whole world of problems. So that's basically my setup. That's what we're going to be talking about for the next 20, 30 minutes or so. Because this is becoming all too common in our Western secular society that we value work over God. And Derek Thompson in The Atlantic, he writes this scathing indictment of American Western culture, saying this is becoming all too prevalent in our society. Derek Thompson, not a Christian as far as I know, but he says this about our culture. He says, the economists of the early 20th century did not foresee that work might evolve from a means of material production to a means of identity production. They failed to anticipate that for the poor and middle class, work would remain a necessity, but for the college-educated elite, it would morph into a kind of religion, promising identity, transcendence, and community. Call it workism. The decline of traditional faith in America has coincided with an explosion of new atheisms. Some people worship beauty, some worship political identities, and others worship their children. But everybody worships something. And workism is among the most potent of the new religions competing for congregants. What is workism? It is the belief that work is not only necessary to economic production, but also the centerpiece of one's identity and life's purpose. Or another way of putting it, the deification, the worship of your job, your vocation. And the rest of the article goes on to quote stat after stat, story after story of how this is all too common living in America, that we often view work as the centerpiece of our identity and life's purpose. And this just isn't a you problem or a me problem. This is an us problem. This is the culture that we are swimming in, as though we are led to believe work is the ultimate thing, the thing of first importance. As we were preparing this sermon this week, one of our pastors was recalling how he went to Israel once, and he encountered this man who was born and raised in Israel and then went to America to go to college and then came back to Israel. And this pastor just wanted to pick his brain and say, I'm curious, what was it like living in America for 4 or 5 years, having come from Israel and moving back? What was your experience? What did you notice? And just really quickly, he said, you guys are trained to prioritize career over relationship. To which our pastor said, okay, tell me more. You got to give me more than that. For example, and then this man went on to say, well, even in school, in our country, children stick together because we believe relationships matter. And in America, you get new classmates almost every single year based off of how well your kids are performing. It's all about progress. It's all about getting ahead. And so what happens is it trains you, it conditions you so that when your company tells you to move here or to move there, you're fine with it because you've conditioned yourself not to be attached to people because you're more concerned with progress rather than people. Again, this is not right or wrong per se. We're just looking at the values, looking at the systems, looking at the trends. And also, when you look at it, just zooming out, in America, the trend is often that more and more people will delay relationships, will delay marriage so that they can be more established in their careers. And overwhelmingly, people will delay this because they are saying, well, I want to make sure my career is intact first. I want to make sure financially I'm secure, that I have a good enough job, a good enough position, and then I'll get to the relationship stuff. Again, I just want us to see this is the water that we are swimming in, whether we realize it or not. And even if, in my example, talking about our pastor talking to that guy from Israel, even if you have some pushback and you say, well, what's the big deal? Progress over relationships, let that just be an indicator that we are buying into this trend that work is of first importance. And also when you look at the last 1,000 years or so, when it comes to work being prioritized, America is the outlier. Plenty of societies over thousands of years has always put the emphasis on community or a faith system, relationships, and then work is often secondary. But in America, we are the outlier where work is priority most often. And before you write me off and say, well, I don't worship my work, no, that ain't me. I don't even like my job. I'm just counting down the days till I can find work somewhere else. Before you write me off, here are some indicators you might actually be deifying or worshiping your work. When your mood is overly affected by your work. And I'm not saying like when you have a bad meeting or when your boss just goes on an angry rant to you when you feel sad. Okay, that is very normal to feel that way. But what I'm saying is when your mood is overly affected by your work, where your emotions just feel like a roller coaster day in and day out, just depending on how work is going. If work is going well that day, you feel like you are the king of the world, nothing can stop you. But if you have a bad day of work, a bad set of circumstances, your soul just feels crushed. Or when your actions are compromised by your work. Maybe you find yourself playing in your head, well, I know I shouldn't talk bad about my coworker, but I've got to look good in front of my boss. Or work evals are coming up soon, so it's okay if I just fudge up the numbers just a little bit. Or maybe you find yourself this internal dialogue. I know I shouldn't inflate the progress report, but my team needs to get this funding for this project. What harm can it do? Or when you find yourself reprioritizing your time to go towards work at the neglect of family and friends. And maybe your habit is to always stay up late to get ahead of work or to wake up early to get ahead of work. When the common trend is you are working 60 plus hours a week to always feel like you are feeling accomplished, always doing more. Maybe you find yourself in life group or at a life group rhythm and you're around people, but you just find yourself during the lingering conversations, maybe just pulling out your phone a little bit and just checking the work email, and you're talking to someone and you're nodding, but you just want to see if anything is of urgency. I'm speaking hypothetically, of course. Like I would never do that. I've done that many times, but I would never. Or let's say you find yourself making big decisions with work first in mind, moving to pursue more money, a higher status, a better position, not really taking it to community, or if you do take it to community, you're just informing them. You're not really inviting them in. Now, side note, at least for our downtown church, this is the number one reason why people leave our church is for a better job in a different city. And to that, we would say, well, of course, there are good reasons to go take another job in another city. If you have a family to provide for, if you need to pay the bills, of course, that is not inherently wrong. But what often tends to happen is people don't even talk to their community. They just say, oh, I've got this job in this city. All right, see you later, bye. And that's it. For most of us, I think it is easier to diagnose when work is your God. It's easier to diagnose when you are worshiping work, when things are going really, really well. But what I want us to see is that for all of us, when our mood, our time, our decision-making is primarily impacted by our work, it's actually symptomatic of a bigger issue going on. Because even if you say you're someone who doesn't like your work, or you're someone who demonizes your work, you think work is a necessary evil, work is still your God. It's just that your work God has been failing you and it's not delivering on its promises. Or to put it another way, it's entirely possible that the reason why you demonize your work is because you've deified the idea of work as a whole. You've mentally just put all of your stock in work, and work just isn't going well. So you just kind of go to work that day just like, I can't believe it, another day. Oh man, I just can't wait to get another job. But you see what's going on? You've bought into the lie that work is your centerpiece, that work is your identity, and it's not delivering on its promises. You've deified work whether you realize it or not. Let's keep reading. Matthew chapter 6, verse 25. Jesus says, "Therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, not about your body or what you will put on." What happens when we deify work, when we worship work over God? We take this good gift that is our job, that is our work, and we turn it into God. But the reality is the God of work is never appeased. The God of work is always wanting more, more, more. The God of work is never satisfied. So you find yourself constantly, there are always more emails to be answered. There's always more emails to be sent out. There's always more meetings to be had. There are always more freezer meals to prep for your family. The God of work is never appeased. It always wants more. And the umbrella term that Jesus calls this when we worship something other than God, what it creates in us, according to verse 25, is anxiety. Anxiety. This constant feeling of, am I doing enough? This constant feeling of, can I be doing more? Am I okay? This anxiety of spirit just chips away at us. Because, like we said at the beginning, when we believe work to be ultimate, it shapes our identity. And it dictates our actions, and it causes a whole world of problems. So when our mood is overly impacted by work first, what happens over time, left unchecked, it creates this sense of insecurity. We're always asking ourselves, well, what does this person think of me? They didn't laugh at my joke, and I thought that was pretty funny. Is something wrong? Do they know something I don't? What's going on? Constantly wondering, how am I performing? What do these people think of me? You're constantly comparing yourself to others. Well, I was scrolling through Instagram and I saw this parent just killing it, apparently. Like, their kids are just eating all this organic food. I bet all their toys have like no chemicals in it. They look like they are just crushing it. But man, like work, for me, parenting these kids, it's hard. I'm just exhausted all the time. I don't look like that. When we worship work, it creates this sense of insecurity. Not only that, it creates a lack of integrity. When your actions are being compromised slowly over time, it creates this lack of integrity. You're always asking yourself, what harm can it do? You're always compromising and saying, well, everybody does it in this line of work, so it's fine. It's not that big of a deal. Everybody does it. It's fine. When you prioritize time with work first, it creates this constant feeling of being overwhelmed. There's always something to do. There's always a text to answer. There's always an email to reply to. You can never really Sabbath. You can never really truly rest because you're worshiping work. And when decision-making is based off of work first, over time, that chips away at us. The anxiety of spirit creates in us a sense of loneliness. And yes, it could be you got that great job in that great city because you're trying to pay the bills and support the family. But when work is first, when you're thinking about work first in your decision-making and you're not inviting community in, what you do is you uproot those relationships, those friendships and community to go work that new job. But then what happens when another job offer comes your way in another city? Well, you uproot yourself, but then it just goes over and over and over, and it creates this sense of loneliness that while many people might know your name, no one really knows you. The anxiety of spirit is never satisfied, and it chips away at us. And we're never able to fully separate who we are with what we do. When work is ultimate, we'll do anything to serve it, to keep it. When we worship work as God, it slowly corrupts us into the people that God did not design for us to be. And the world is full of stories of these examples when people worship God unchecked over time. We see this in the headlines all the time. All right, how many of you remember Enron back in the day? Anyone remember? All right. This was back in 2001. It was this large company. At the time, it was considered one of the largest corporate bankruptcies ever. And executives, upper management, they were lying about financial reports, lying to shareholders. They ended up losing millions and millions of dollars, and executives went to jail. And everyone was just indignant. Like, how dare these people do this? Or, if you've been watching Netflix recently, maybe you saw the Fire Festival. Anyone watch that? Yeah, okay. So Billy McFarland, back in, I think it was 2017, he promised this big music festival with all of these A-list celebrities that were going to attend, and all of these bands and these supermodels, and they were all going to be on this private island, and you could have this life-changing experience if you get a ticket to the Fire Festival. And he charged people anywhere from $5,000 to $250,000 to get this once-in-a-lifetime experience. And so I think this festival sold out. All these people converged to this island only to find out that the festival never really happened. None of those bands or supermodels or celebrities ever showed up. They were just left stranded. And Billy McFarland even said in an interview, once he was found out that it was all a scam, he said, "Yeah, we were just selling a pipe dream to your average loser." And we were indignant by that. Like, that gets us angry. One more for you. Martin Shkreli in 2018, he was one of those big pharma guys who marked up this life-saving medication by 5,000% because he was concerned about the bottom dollar. He wanted to make the most money possible. So when it came to this life-saving drug that people need, he marked it up by 5,000%. And asked why he did it, he said, quote, "I wanted to grow my stature and my reputation." That's why he did it. And here's the thing, like, that stuff outrages us. Like, we get angry about that stuff. And we love to label them as monsters. How could they do that? How could these monsters do such a thing? But the truth is, I think we often label them as monsters because we want to create some distance. We want to call them monsters because we're afraid of actually looking in the mirror and seeing how we might be like them. Because here's what happened. Those guys weren't working this job just being good employees, good upright citizens, and then go to bed that night and then wake up instantly the next morning thinking, I'm going to rip all of these people off. No, what happened was they worshiped their work. They deified their work. They compromised their actions because it was normative in their line of work. And then slowly, over time, it just wanted more and more and more and more. And they were able to do what they did because they worshiped their work. And this is what happens to us when work becomes ultimate. It informs our identity, and we're willing to do whatever it takes. When these set of circumstances squeezed them, their actions were made in light of the identity that they were chasing after. When their own anxiety of spirit met up with their deification of work and their unique circumstances, it led them to do what they did. And all of us are susceptible to this. Back to Matthew chapter 6. It gets better, I promise. There's going to be some good news. Matthew chapter 6, verse 26. Jesus says, "Look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not of more value than they? And which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to his span of life? And why are you anxious about clothing? Why are you anxious about your work performance? Why are you anxious about that job eval coming up soon? Verse 28, consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. Yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass of the field, which today is alive and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, will he not also much more clothe you, O you of little faith? Therefore, do not be anxious, saying, what shall we eat? Or what shall we drink? Or what shall we wear? For the Gentiles seek after all these things, and your heavenly Father knows what you need, and that you need them all. So here in this passage, Jesus gives us two analogies. He gives us birds, and he gives us lilies. And Jesus is saying your God knows what they need. He provides for them, but you are of far more value to him than birds and flowers, right? Birds and flowers were not made in God's image. You are. Birds and flowers were not sinful and corrupt and broken and ruining the world, so God had to send Jesus to die for broken, sinful birds and flowers. He did that for you. He didn't conquer death for birds and flowers. He didn't say on the Mount of Ascension, go and make disciples of all birds and flowers, right? He's saying that for us. He loves us. He conquered the grave for us. And if God takes care of even the most minute things, God is going to take care of you. We don't have to worship work, where work demands for more and more and more because of Jesus and the cross and the empty tomb. Jesus reminds us it's been done, done, done. God was appeased when Jesus died on the cross for our sin, but the God of work is never appeased. Who are you going to serve? You can only worship one master. Which one are you going to serve? Because while work tells you to do more, Jesus says it's already been done and you can have grace. Give yourself grace because Jesus is a better master. He's a better king. When you worship him, when you see him as the good king that he is, you're able to then be freed up. You're able to be freed up from your anxiety of spirit, and instead you can rest in him. You can be freed up to be this non-anxious presence in your home, in your workplace, as you go throughout life, who despite the circumstances, despite the gossip, despite perhaps the pay cut or getting laid off, you are someone who sees work for what it is. It is a good thing, but it is not God, and it makes for a lousy God. So worship Jesus instead. When your identity and who you are is secure in Jesus, you are freed up to undeify your work, to view it in its proper place. You can work hard. You can work well. You can be a good parent, a coworker, or boss, knowing ultimately that our work is about Jesus and glorifying him. So when you take care of your kids, it's ultimately not about your kids, and it's not about you either. It's about Jesus. When you are doing employee reviews, it's not about you. It's not about your boss, and it's not even necessarily about your coworkers. It's about Jesus and putting him first. Because the key to this is found in verse 33. Jesus says, but seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all of these things will be added to you. The cure for our anxiety of spirit is seeking first the kingdom of God. Because when you seek first his kingdom, you begin to realize you are not first and foremost your job. You are first and foremost a follower of Jesus, and that is a good thing. And that is exactly what your soul needs, to follow him, to know that you are first and foremost a child of God. And yes, compromising situations in your workplace will still be there in which you are tempted to put work first, but because you are in Jesus, because you worship God and not work, because you're able to put the kingdom first, you're able to see those temptations for what they are. You're able to recognize it and reject it and replace it instead with kingdom-first, gospel-minded ethics. And we need to know that because we live in a broken world, every job comes with these set of circumstances and temptations to put work first. But because we are in Jesus, because we are about his kingdom first, we need to recognize those temptations in our job, reject that temptation and replace it with kingdom values instead. So I'll give you a few examples. Number one, a car salesman, right? No offense if you're here this morning and you sell cars. In fact, we need you as a society. Lots of parents with lots of kids need you so that we can shuttle our kids to and from preschool or nursery so that we can then drive to our job. We need you. But if you are a car salesman, what are the normal temptations and tendencies that come with your job? Well, the stereotype tends to be that car salesmen will lie about numbers or cheat a customer or tell customers only what they want to hear because it's all about the bottom dollar and pushing product and making enough money for yourself. But if you are in Jesus, it's not about work first. It's about the kingdom first. So you're able to recognize those temptations, reject the temptations, and replace it with kingdom first ethics. So because you are in Jesus, you can be sincere, you can be caring, you can be an honest car salesman who wants the absolute best for your customer. Or, I'll give you another one, teachers. Like teachers, we absolutely need you. You are a pillar to our society and to our city. And while my kids aren't in the school system yet, you help partner with parents in ways that we don't even see. So if you're a teacher here this morning, thank you. We need you, and you need to know that there are its own set of unique temptations and circumstances in your workplace to value work first and not the kingdom. So, gossiping in the teacher's lounge about students, mocking helicopter parents to coworkers, or on the flip side, there can become a set of temptations like having this hyper sense of responsibility to your students, becoming overly dependent on your students as though the trajectory of their lives rises or falls based off of how good of a job you are doing. So be aware of the temptations that come with that job, recognize it, reject it, and instead replace it with kingdom first ethics. So you can be a teacher who refuses to gossip, a teacher who empathizes with parents who are honestly just trying their best, and trust that God is in control of your students' lives ultimately, and not you. I'll give you one last one, being in ministry. So I'm a fan of that. I would argue we need those people in our lives, yeah? But how many of you have witnessed a pastor who just up and leaves a church to go work for another church that's often generally bigger, right? I grew up in church. I saw that all the time. A pastor would be working at a church, but then the next week they're not there anymore because what happens most of the time, they got a job at a bigger church with a bigger paycheck. And again, that's not wrong per se. They are trying, if the goal is they are trying to provide for their family and perhaps that work position at that church, they just weren't able to pay the bills, then yeah, that's fine. But what often tends to be the trend is valuing work first over God, even in ministry. So as soon as the bigger paycheck comes along, that's when the pastor leaves to go to that new church. I see this happening in my life all the time. I constantly play the comparison game. If I'm driving around Columbia or if I'm driving around another city and I see like this mega church building, like that just instantly makes me insecure. I just constantly think, well, gosh, look at this giant building. Man, am I doing my job well? Because if I was, maybe our church would have a giant building like this. Or I can just swipe through Instagram and I follow some church accounts and I'll come to this pastor who's preaching who's wearing some really nice sneakers. Like his sneaker game is strong. And people are just like standing ovation every 5 minutes. And I'm like, oh gosh, like that doesn't happen to me. Am I doing this job well? I don't know. Or I can just be so performance driven and just have so much insecurity by how well am I teaching? Like, am I doing a good job? Like avoiding filler words? Have I been saying for the last every minute or so? Like, I don't know. And it just leads me to insecurity. Constantly valuing work over God. Constantly saying there's got to be more, there's got to be more. Never being able to truly rest. So whatever your job you're working, you need to ask yourself, what are those tendencies? what are those temptations? If you're a doctor, what are the tendencies that come with the job? If you work in finance, what are the tendencies? If you're a parent, what are the tendencies that come with the job? Recognize it, reject it, replace it with kingdom first ethics, because Jesus is a good king, because Jesus gives you grace and love and meaning and purpose in a way that your job never can deliver on. We have the opportunity to remember God invites us into a better way, away from anxiety and towards a non-anxious presence, to remember that work is good and it's a gift, but it's not God and it's not ultimate. Only Jesus is. Will you pray with me, please?